All right, so this is in response to the myth of the culture of poverty. So as I read the article, I thought it brought up really interesting information about poverty and how it impacts students' lives. I really found it interesting when it talked about how a lot of times that we do give students who seem like they're smarter, who they have a better background, how we do give them the upper hand. I thought that was interesting. I thought it was really good, really eye-opening to read about some of the misconceptions of people who live in poverty. The other thing that I thought of, though, as well, is when I was reading it, and this just comes from years at USF, I guess, is that, this is just one article amongst another about poverty and how it's impacted. So I'd be really curious to see what other scholars have to say about these myths and that kind of thing, but also, well, what they put it down as myths, while they may not be the rule, I know that at times there are exceptions for these myths that they said they may not be the rule, but I know there are exceptions at times where it is in fact not a myth, and there are students who are treated unequally because of where they are in the class system and that kind of thing. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that this is one article, and that a lot of times every author has their bias and their bias, and so I think it's important to, as long as while we're reading about the myths of poverty, culture and of poverty, is important to look and see what other scholars have to say as well. So, but overall, definitely a good article to read, definitely eye-opening. How it put how I've seen or experienced it, how I've seen it, this doesn't necessarily have to do with what I've seen in school or anything, but I think a lot of times we like to, I guess one of the biggest ways I've seen it is in the movie The Blind Side, where because of, I forget the kid's name in the movie, but because of his place in society, where his class system, a lot of times he was looked over. I know there's a couple scenes in that movie where he voiced in writing, or he voiced in with his guardian. He voiced that, that he didn't feel like he was being treated fairly because of the color of his skin or because of where he was in society. And so that right there in itself, I think, is a testament to that, to what this article is saying. I think that, I can't remember his name, it's making me really mad. But I think that is an example of how some of these myths play out in society. And I think the movie The Blind Side is a good example and representation of that. And then finally, how does this impact what we've seen in the chapter? I just thought when I read the chapter, I thought it was really interesting how it talked about how if we deem a kid to be, from a poverty, like an impoverished family, how we won't give them as equal wait time because we think they're slower. We won't give them as much wait time. We won't try and have them explain their answers more. I don't think that I've necessarily been doing that, but I certainly could be better about, and I even saw Marzano in that video clip where he's talking about how it's so easy to slip into that, and so just being really intentional that when you're talking to every student, you're giving them an opportunity to expand on their answers and expand on what they're saying and bringing to the class, and making sure that you encourage them every step of the way. I think it's really important to bring in that encouragement part. That's really huge to me, is that baby steps. I think of one kid I have in my class where it's always a struggle to have him talk in class, and he's always kind of bashful about anything he has to say. And so I think it's really important that, when you are giving that student an opportunity to expand on their answers and in their thoughts, giving them an opportunity to say the things, but making sure you're encouraging even those little baby steps. And so ultimately, this article, I think, it connected to how our perception of kids impacts how we treat them in the classroom. I think that's very heartbreaking that a lot of times students in particular don't have any control over what circumstances they're being raised in and that kind of thing. influences how they're treated in class. And so I think that's terribly heartbreaking. And I think this article tied in to the soft chalk lesson very well in that aspect. So those are my thoughts on this article. Thank you.